Welcome to This Late Hour, a look at the world through the lens of Scripture. I'm your host, Casey Knowlton. What if I told you that Noah's Ark had been found? Not only found, but was in the mountains of Ararat in eastern Turkey near the Iranian border. So large it could be seen from space. Surely by now you're saying, well, I would have heard of that. Maybe, but maybe not. The place we will be discussing today is known as the Durupinar site, a large boat-shaped formation that was first photographed in the 1950s, later studied by many different people of faith along with scientific experts. Ron Wyatt is the most notable person of faith in relation to the findings, as he has claimed for years, up until the time of his death in 1999, that this site was indeed the buried remains of Noah's Ark. These claims have been met with much skepticism over the years, the formation dismissed as a geological oddity. But what if Mr. Wyatt was right? What if this really is what is left of Noah's Ark? On today's program, I'm going to be interviewing the director of Discovered Media, Andrew Jones, who has been living in Turkey right near the Durupinar site, continuing efforts to study and confirm the formation as authentic. While this episode is not specifically part of the Genesis Problem series, it does directly tie into it. The reasons for this are threefold. First, our understanding of Genesis directly impacts our view of the last days we find ourselves living in. Remember the words of Jesus in Matthew 24:37-39. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And then they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. If we dismiss the flood account as myth or legend, then Jesus is comparing his second coming to something that never happened. That is more than a little problematic. If we take Christ at his word, also adopting his worldview, we should expect to find things that align with what I'll call our forgotten history. We learn three important things from the flood account. God is patient, God is merciful, and God will judge. Peter reminds us in 1 Peter 3:20, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Also 2 Peter 3:5-9. It escapes their notice that by the word of God the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. But by his word the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. But do not let this one fact escape your notice, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like 1 day. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. As we see in these teachings from the Apostle Peter, God is patient and desires for none to perish. We also learn that there will come a time when his patience runs out. Let us not make light of the flood account, for another judgment is coming, and it may well be that God's patience is waning. Secondly, it is our responsibility as faithful Christians to vet those who would put out such claims so that the witness of the church is kept strong. Peter also warns us of the rise of false teachers who in their greed will exploit you with false words, from 2 Peter 2:3. While we cannot know the heart and motives of Ron Wyatt, we can look at this finding and judge it according to the Scriptures. I think that you'll find as I discuss these matters with Andrew Jones today, the evidence is not only compelling, but aligns with Scripture. As for Mr. Wyatt's motives, I'll leave that up to the listener to decide. Third, God has been revealing incredible treasures of the faith for the last few decades, including this one. I think it is of the utmost importance as we continue in our posture of watchfulness that we see what God has been doing around the world. There are multiple magnificent findings of our faith that are going unnoticed or being dismissed. It is my hope to not only highlight these findings, as I will be doing today, but to consider the implications of why God is choosing to reveal these things now in this late hour. Now, let's listen into the first part of my 2-part interview with Andrew Jones of Discovered Media. Well, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I've got a great guest today, Andrew Jones of Discovered Media. Andrew, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you.
It's great to have you. So, for those who don't know anything about Discovered Media, anything about Andrew Jones, who is Andrew Jones?
Yeah. Well, I'm just a regular guy. I'm currently though living in the country of Turkey here, and we're in Eastern Turkey. Actually, I'm in Eastern Turkey at this point, but I do travel a lot, and I do tours across the Middle East when there's not a pandemic. And but let's see, I was born in the Philippines. My dad's he was in the U.S. Air Force. He was an American, and my mom was a Filipino, and that's where they met at the U.S. Air Force base there. But I've just been interested in archaeology all my life, so here I am over here living among the biblical lands mentioned, in the Bible.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. So, you actually live there in Turkey?
Yeah, I have a residency here, but this is something kind of new for me. I did it right after the pandemic started, so I've been here a little over a year and a half. And my friend here, who was kind enough to, he actually built a studio apartment for me, and we're about 30 minutes from the site we'll be talking today that Ron Wyatt and others believe to be the buried remains of Noah's Ark. And so I am living at the base of Mount Ararat.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize you were so
Yeah.
close
Yeah,
to
I
that
see it.
site.
Well, I mean, it's like, 10 miles away, but it's such a huge mountain. You see it outside your window. It's the tallest mountain in Turkey. So it's just sitting right there.
That's a fantastic view. That's great.
Yes, yes.
So, are you essentially the director or the administrator, or what is your actual title? Because you run Discovered Media, is that right?
Yes. I mean, it might sound like a big group, but it's not. It's we have some locals who help us, and then we have some volunteers. Depending on the project, who would either edit videos for us or help promote online our media. But usually, it's a one-man show. So
Okay.
I do the tours, I do the planning. I do bring in different contractors depending on the budget for filming. So sometimes we'll have a camera guy come over from the U.S. To help, but otherwise, I do a lot of vlogging myself. So yeah, it's just a small little group.
Well, I've been so impressed with the footage you've been getting at some of these locations. Just some incredible sweeping cinematic shots through the drone footage and everything. It's been really breathtaking. So for
Oh,
those who don't, well, go ahead.
we love using the drone. So yeah, it's always great to get those aerial shots.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to watch those. Give a little explanation here to the audience. What is Discovered Media and what's its purpose?
Yeah, so I started it based on my interest in archaeology. At first, it was like a personal interest, and I went overseas on some archaeological digs in Israel, and I was the head of the media for the Wyatt Archaeological Research's digs in Jerusalem from 2003 to 2006. I've always had an interest in cameras and technology, and combining that with doing archaeology and recording, and then coming back home and showing my friends and family, that kind of blossomed into something larger where people wanted me to do lectures and meetings and for home groups and churches. And so I started wanting to do, to create better quality media. And then I started a YouTube channel, and yeah, so I had an outlet to put the media out there. And so I started Discovered Media as a way to share my interest in archaeology, and specifically biblical archaeology, and the trips and exploration over here that we do. And so its main purpose, though, is to get people familiar with these sites who usually wouldn't leave their home or leave their country. And so
Sure.
we like to do these short little videos, kind of showing what it's like to be on site and to see these places that you hear about in the Bible or maybe even in the news, but you're not able to come over. So That's kind of our main goal, is to share online these video clips.
You have definitely filmed some notable areas. What are some of those that you have filmed that you could just explain to the audience?
Yeah, so I think the best example is the site in Saudi Arabia, Jebel al-Lawz, also known as Jebel Makla. That range of mountains in the northwest part of Saudi. It's kind of a remote area, but was the ancient land of Midian. And so it is in this area that some believe the real Mount Sinai was located. And so back in 2016, before they were issuing tourist visas, which they started in September of 2019, but back in 16, you had to get a business visa, which was quite difficult. And at that time, a friend knew one of the Saudi royal princes, and we were able to get a business invite through one of this guy's companies. And so a small group of us went over, and thankfully they give you a 5-year visa, multi-entry. And so I was able to go back multiple times. I've been back so far like 20 some times to Saudi Arabia, investigating the sites, documenting them, doing tours, and we were able to do some of the first drone footage from the summit of what is known as the real Mount Sinai, and also another site on the other side of the mountain range is this giant split rock that Jim and Penny Caldwell, who were Americans working in the oil industry back in the 90s, they discovered that site, and it looks to be the probable rock of Horeb that's mentioned in the Bible that Moses struck and the water came out at Rephidim.
Right.
And so we were able to do some really cinematic drone footage there, especially during the golden hour, they call it, like 2 hours before sunset. And so it's been a lot of fun doing that there. And we have a lot of stories about flying the drone, because back then it was kind of illegal to fly a drone. Now it's not. But so we had some fun experiences in Saudi doing that. And then also here in Turkey, we've filmed the Durupinar site that we'll be talking about today, I believe. And this is the site that many believe to be the buried remains of Noah's Ark. And so these are some of the areas that we have been filming.
Now, you had mentioned working with the Wyatt Archaeological Organization, something along those lines.
Yeah, yes.
And so, Ron Wyatt, for those who don't know, obviously has played a key part in uncovering a lot of these locations or rediscovering them, or however you want to put it. But he's certainly played a key role in their discovery. And so, what is your actual connection to Mr. Wyatt and his organization there?
Yeah, so I first learned of Ron's research and we can say claims of discovery back when I was a kid in middle school. This was like 1990 or 1991. And so what happened, he had some group invited him out to Sacramento, California, where I'm from. And it was a school night. It was a Thursday night. And my dad told me, he's like, hey, this guy's coming. He's going to do a lecture on archaeology. I had homework. I probably still am a nerd. So I decided to stay home and do my homework. But I asked my dad to go attend for me, and he was willing to do that. But he came back and said, "Well, this one man said he's found everything, Mount Sinai, the Red Sea crossing, Noah's Ark." And so I was interested. So I went and bought his book at a local Christian bookstore, and it was a small little booklet titled "Discovered Noah's Ark." And after reading that, I thought, "Oh no, I have all these questions for this guy," because the book was very brief.
Mm-hmm.
And so back then, this was before the internet, the early '90s. So there was no looking up his email or all that type of stuff. So I called 411, which is, for those who don't know, that's how you look at people's information if they're listed in the phone book. And so I got the operator, and they asked what city. I said Madison, Tennessee, and I gave the person's name, Ron Wyatt, and then they found a phone number for a Ron Wyatt. And so I called the person, and I called the number, and it was Ron. He actually picked up, and he was nice, but he had just gotten back from the Middle East. Like, he was walking in the door. I had called him.
Oh, wow.
And he said, yeah, he's like, hey, call me back in a couple of days. I'll be willing to answer your questions. And so, yeah, in fact, that week I called him a couple times. And then even after that, I would call and talk for hours. Back then, you didn't have unlimited. Like there was no cell phones back then, or they were like huge bricks. So most people didn't have one, and so like for long distance phone calls, you were charged. And
Right.
so my parents got the phone bill. They're like, "Who are you calling in Tennessee for all these hours?" But so I finally invited him out to Sacramento to hold some meetings in 1996 and 1997. And then he invited me on one of his trips in 97 to the pyramids. He was going to do some research to uncover a hidden chamber he thought he had discovered. But sadly, they had a big terrorist attack there. And his contact in the government was super busy dealing with that issue. And so he canceled his trip. And instead, I went to Noah's Ark for the first time with a friend. So in 1997, we went to Turkey. Spent a week over here. And then sadly, Ron had passed away in 1999. But after that, his organization got a permit to do some excavations in Jerusalem in the Garden Tomb area, which is kind of known as the Protestant site for where Christ was buried. And so we were a whole group of us went over with his organization that Richard Reeves was the president of, and he still is. But they did excavations there for a number of years, from I believe 2003 to 2007, and then again in 2011. So from 2003 to 6, I was head of the media, and I had a group of videographers and photographers working under me, and we documented the digs and did interviews, and that was kind of our role in that. But so it's just more of a volunteer thing, and knowing him, talking to him on the phone a lot. I used to, as I mentioned, spend hours just ask him lots of questions. And his wife, Marinelle, I used to call her a lot when Ron was at the hospital working his day job. I would call and she would pick up, and I would ask her all these questions. But I did that with others too, involved in his research. I would also like talk to David Fazold, who was at one point working with Ron on the Noah's Ark discovery. And so for me, it was just super interesting. I want to get all the information I could. And that kind of also was the reason why I went overseas finally and just started doing these type of trips to document the sites, investigate them. And so, yeah.
So as you got to know Ron and spend all this time speaking with him and his wife and working with him a little and having him at conferences, what's your impression of Ron? Because there are those who would say Ron essentially was a fraud. They've dismissed most, if not all, of his claims or his findings as irrelevant, given the fact they believe he's a fraud. So how do you respond to those critics out there who would come at you with those types of claims?
Well, first, on a personal level, so I was a kid in high school and college, and I mainly dealt with him on the phone, talking to him. But there's other times where he came out to Sacramento those 2 times, and then I would watch videos of his other meetings. And I had other friends who would actually go on tours or expeditions with him. So I had some really good friends who knew him more on a personal level than I did. But from what I saw, I remember, for one thing, he was super humble, just never talking about himself, like pumping himself up, like, "Hey, look what I did." It was always about the work itself, the Bible itself. And he always mentioned, you got to use this to win souls for Christ. So he was all about winning souls for the kingdom. And I remember one time at a potluck, he had come out to Sacramento, and we had like a luncheon before his meeting, and we had all these people in the room, and someone had brought up something about like a sporting event or some I think it was a basketball player, and he didn't know who the person was, a pretty famous basketball player. But he only, like, like dealing with him on a one-to-one basis, he would only talk about the Bible and these biblical archaeology. He didn't care about sports or archaeology. I mean, or about politics or entertainment. Everything in his life was focused in on this work that he believed God called him to do. And so that was quite interesting, because most people, they usually you can engage them, and as you mentioned something like politics, and you can start a big argument or something.
Mm-hmm.
But for him, it was all about the work and winning souls for Christ. And so in regards to people who, if someone wants to disagree with his interpretation of the data from these sites, that's fine. But then to, accuse someone of being a fraud, that's a different story. I never saw any evidence of that, like financial fraud, or, he paid for his own trips usually. He would take his own time off of work and go do these, multiple research trips over in the Middle East and, risk his own life. So, and he lived in a humble home. I've seen photos of the first home that he was in the, the late 80s, and then the current home that, his widow still has when he had passed away in 1999. But I mean, it's not like a mansion or something you think of like a televangelist having. So it wasn't a money thing for him. He wasn't out to take people's money. So that, that is definitely, I think the key word would be humble. He's a humble person, very, very humble and God-fearing.
And one of the things I thought about with Ron, because I never knew Ron other than just what I've seen of his books and videos and things. I think about that scripture, you shall know them by their fruit. And the more that these sites are being combed over and looked at, and now with the advanced technology, well, I mean, they seem pretty accurate and pretty genuine to me. So I can't speak to Ron personally. I didn't know his motives because I can't read people's motives. I didn't know him personally, but just from what I'm seeing on the outset, certainly there's a lot of encouragement knowing that the more digging we're doing, the more it seems these are being substantiated.
From what I remember, and you can also watch his old videos on YouTube from his meetings and his questions and answer sessions after the meetings. And you can see his focus was everything about the Bible. And so for someone who is going after, like, trying to steal people's money or make a name for themselves, usually they'll slip up, and you'll know right away that they just want your money, or they're just talking about themselves only. And so that was not the case with him.
Yeah. And, the stuff with Saudi Arabia, as you well know, and what we call the real Mount Sinai, back before there were fences, and back before you could go and take a tour, I mean, he was there with his sons. And if I'm not mistaken, he was detained for a good long while with his sons for trespassing or whatever the charges were. But I mean, he was definitely out risking himself to, look at these areas.
Yeah. In fact, I remember reading, you can read this in his book, but I think it's in this 2-hour film too, that some YouTube channels still have up, but about Noah's Ark. But his first trip to this area of Turkey where I'm at, this was his first trip overseas, and he had his 2 teenage sons with him, and they were almost chased out of town. I mean, they fled their hotel because a group of bad characters were storming the, going up the stairs, making a loud racket and banging on their doors, trying to break in. And so they fled for their lives. They had to tie sheets together like a movie, and because they were at like the second or third floor, and they had to drop down on another roof right below them, and then from there drop down to the street level, and then they ran to the police. He had a very interesting life, but it wasn't like something he was like he wanted, like he was trying to get in trouble or something. And the thing with Saudi Arabia, he tried for years to cross over the, get a visa to go investigate this mountain, that because, he believed he had found the Red Sea crossing. And so after that, he started looking for a site that could hold the Israelites, the 1 to 2 million people, and where they would encamp in front of the mountain. He, looked at the maps they had back then. There's no Google Earth back then, but he had some topographical maps and flight maps. And from that, he chose this Jebel Allah's area that had a big valley or a big plain in front of it on the east side. And it was like the only mountain that fit, but, he couldn't get over there because Saudi is, at the time was a closed country, no tourist visas, and you could only go on a business visa or on a Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca. And so he finally decided he would sneak across the border. And so him and his sons did. And, they got caught coming back, trying to get back to Jordan. And they were arrested. And sadly, the reason why they were detained for so long was because an associate of his who he had trusted and told about his trip before he left. He had told his family and then this one other guy. And this guy, out of jealousy or something, evil, but he called the Saudi embassy and said that there was these guys, who were trying to sneak in and out of the country, and they were actually Israeli spies. His associate claimed, and so that's kind of why the Saudis held him for so long, to figure out who they were. So he was in prison there for I think 70 some days, 73 days, 75 days, but it was a long time.
Yeah, and you think at that point, if he were just a glory hound, he would have just thrown in the towel and walked away, but that's not the case. So I think that speaks to his character.
Correct. No, very true.
Well, so you were mentioning that, you live there right inside of the mountain, Mount Ararat, and that you've been working on this. Now, please help me with this. It's the Durupinar. Is that right?
Yes. Durupinar.
Which is the name of the pilot who first photographed the site. Is that right?
No, he was the Turkish army captain who worked in the mapping division. And he was making the maps for this region, but, over in their main office in Ankara, the capital. And so he was looking at these photographs that were taken by someone else, another Turkish pilot. And so he was the one who spotted, though, the boat formation in these old photos. And it was back in 1959. That's when this person first saw it, Ilhan Durupinar.
Was he one of the few that went back and had done the little excavation with blowing out the part of it with the dynamite?
Yeah. So what happened? He discovered it on September 11th. Interesting date, 1959. And then about a week later, it hit the Turkish news. And then it got picked up by the international news the next month in October of 1959. And the Turkish government released the one photograph that showed the boat formation from, high up, in the air. So that got a group interested from America. And so an evangelist named George Vandeman and an archaeologist, a reporter, and a businessman, and a couple others. I think a professor from Ohio State University who was an expert in photogrammetry. They all went over to Turkey and then met up with the Turkish military and got permission to go find this site that they, saw from the air. And they went out there on the ground, including Captain Durupinar, and they finally found the site. And for the brief amount of time they were there, they're walking on the very top of it, and so they see the boat formation in the mud flow, and they realize that there was no, what they thought would be like the ark sticking up out of the ground. Instead they see just the top boat formation with grass growing on the top, and so they decided to use some dynamite. Definitely not an archaeological tool. 2 or 3 places they blew holes in the side trying to see what was under the ground, and in their mind it was just rocks and dirt. And so they all left pretty disappointed, except for one guy thought that they were too negative. That was Professor Brandenburg from Ohio State University, and he believed that still it was impossible for a natural process to create that type of boat formation. But at any rate, that was in 1960, and so Life magazine published an article about the expedition and showed photographs. This was the September 5th, 1960 issue. And that's when Ron Wyatt first heard about it. He saw that magazine article. And then a year later, a famous Turkish photographer, Ara Güler, who has passed away, but he was hired by the Turkish government to go document the site better. And they got him in a private little, airplane, and he flew at a lower altitude and was able to take a lot better photographs of the site from the air. And so then the next decade, in the late 1970s, Ron Wyatt finally got over there with his sons. And then from the 70s until the 90s, Ron was involved in his research at the site along with others. And it was kind of Ron's push to get others to come work at the site, and everyone, in the news talking about it in the 80s, especially, that got the site on the map. Everyone was talking about it that whole decade. And so that's kind of where it was left off when Ron passed away in 1999.
Now, you've been kind of picking up the mantle, if you will, there at the site. So what kind of work are you doing there in regards to testing and furthering the work he was doing?
So yeah, so besides doing media documentation and stuff associated with that, we are also trying to pursue scientific work with the Turkish scientists who we have partnered with who are interested in the site. And so some of the things that we are trying to accomplish, whether it'll be this year or next year, it'll depend on funding, but the Turks would like to do complete geophysical surveys. So geophysical surveys, that involves things where you can see below the ground using different types of technologies like ground penetrating radar, ERT, which is also known as resistivity, which uses electricity to map features below the ground, magnetometry, which uses the Earth's magnetic field to also again map features below the ground. So these are different tools that archaeologists and geologists use. And so they would like to do a complete scan of the site with as many of these modern techniques as possible, and also do a core drilling survey. And so core drilling is something where they have a little machine that will take core samples, so 3 to 4 inches in diameter, and will drill into the ground and pull out these samples, and they'll tell the geologists and archaeologists, what's below the ground without doing a full scale excavation. And so these are some of the things that we are hoping to accomplish this year or next year.
So they're definitely retiring the dynamite, it sounds like.
Yes, for sure. For a good reason.
Right. Well, so you're there and you're kind of leading the way on some of these things. I've been following this site for a long time, with obviously strong feelings about this being almost certainly the true resting place of Noah's Ark. On the podcast recently, I've been discussing the importance of a literal view of the book of Genesis in relation to the Christian worldview. And so just, I want to hear kind of your standpoint on this and your opinion. If this site is indeed Noah's Ark, how significant is that to the church and frankly, just to the world in general?
Oh, I think very significant, because that is a major story early on in the Bible that most people discount and say is a fable. And so thus they throw out the whole Bible. And so obviously, if you're a person of faith, by faith, we believe the flood happened and that there was an ark, and, Noah and his family were saved. But outside of those who have this belief, most people in the world will say, "Oh, that's just a story, from ancient times that people made up. Maybe there was a local flood or something, but this global flood that destroyed the earth and only 8 survivors, that's just something they can't fathom. So there's no evidence for it, and especially with evolution involved, they believe things happen over a long period of time, with slow processes in geology, and that there's no evidence for this global catastrophe that would destroy the whole earth. So finding something like Noah's Ark, which is a key piece of the story, would go a long ways, and I believe helping people who are searching for truth accept a biblical account. And obviously there are those who, even as Christ said, if you were to raise someone from the dead, they would still not believe in him. And he did it. He raised Lazarus, and then the Pharisees tried to kill Lazarus too. So even something like as big as that miracle happening, it won't convince everyone in the world. So, but there are those who are searching, and they do need physical proof, like doubting Thomas, who after Christ was risen, he wanted to see the nail wounds, the prints in Christ's hands and side with a spear where he was pierced. And so you're going to find people today who need stuff from biblical archaeology, from creation science, scientific backgrounds where the data, they need to see the actual data to believe in the story. And I think God knows that, and he's willing to provide that. And so Noah's Ark being discovered would be a huge discovery, and help not just those of us of faith to use it as a tool, because then we could take this and show people the truth of the Bible, but also those who are searching on their own and need this physical evidence. It would be a major benefit to them.
Yeah, it's interesting with this Durupinar site, this Noah's Ark site. It comes into the news every decade or so, and then it's
Yeah,
dismissed. It comes in the news, and then it's dismissed. And
yeah.
I found it interesting, how regardless of that fact, that pattern, people keep coming to it and being drawn to it, saying, no, there's something more going on here. And so with all the work you've done and, talking with Ron, being at the site, filming the site, being involved in some of the push for testing, what would you say are the top 5 points of evidence that you would give in support of this being the literal remains of Noah's legendary Ark?
I think obviously when you have to go to the Bible because that's where it describes the Ark and also tells the story. And so from the biblical account, it says that Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Ararat. And so if you look at that word Ararat, number one, it comes from the name Urartu, which was an ancient kingdom that covered this area of Turkey and parts of Iran and Armenia. And but the key phrase there is mountains, plural. And so basically what it's saying in the Bible is that Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of this kingdom of Urartu. It would be like me saying like the Ark landed in the mountains of Colorado in America or the mountains of Canada. It's not a specific mountain, just saying the mountainous region of this country.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is one of the key things about this site is definitely in the mountains of Urartu. Around us, you find these archaeological sites of Urartu, their castles, their homes, their settlements, and graves. And so it's all around where this is. So we know we're in the right location. And then the second thing I think is the shape. It's not a triangle. It's not a square. It's a boat. And now some will say that based on the word ark in Genesis, that has to be a rectangular barge. But that's that's them imposing their views on the biblical text. The text does not say that. The text only gives the dimensions, but not the shape of it. And so just based on the seaworthiness of ships in a storm, everyone agrees that a ship is better than a barge out in the big ocean with a storm. And so these barges that they talk about are actually only used in the coastal areas and in the harbors, and they're not used out in the middle of the ocean. So the boat formation, the shape itself, that's what got the attention of the people back in the 1960s because it looked like a boat from the air. And so that's point number 2, I think, is that you have the shape of a boat here. Mm-hmm. Number 3 is the dimensions. So what's really fascinating, and I think a key piece of evidence, is that this boat formation is exactly 300 Royal Egyptian cubits. And the book of Genesis, Moses, who I believe wrote that, he said that Noah's Ark was 300 cubits long. And we believe that Moses, being educated in the Egyptian courts, he would have used the Royal Egyptian cubit. Now, on top of that, you can read in like Encyclopedia Britannica and other archaeological literature that the Egyptian royal cubit was like the key measurement system used throughout the Middle East at that time, kind of like metrics are today, the mm-hmm. metric system. And so these, if you take 300 Royal Egyptian cubits and convert it to our system in America, for example, it comes out to be 515 feet. Now, we had a tour group out here in June, and one of the guys who came was from Texas, and he brought a 300-foot-long tape measure because he wanted to physically measure the boat formation. You heard what Ron said and what others, but he wanted to do it mm-hmm. himself on the ground. And so we filmed him, and he measured it out, and he used up all his 300 feet, and then he redid it again, and it was exactly 515 feet long. Now, that could be a coincidence, but for me, that's a key thing is you have this boat formation in the right location. That's exactly the length in the Bible. Now, in regards to the width, it is wider in the middle. So the middle of the boat's 138 feet wide. But there's 2 possibilities there. Number one, you could say that the boat over time has decayed and splayed out, so fallen apart, and thus pushing out the sides and making it a little wider in the middle. Or you could say that measurement in the Bible was the average. It's a boat shape, so the average width being the number of cubits given in the Bible. And then in regards to the height, obviously we would have to excavate the site to see exactly how deep it is. But based on the geophysical survey done by John Larson in 2014, they did resistivity, which uses electricity to measure and map out what's below the ground. His data shows three main layers below the ground, which you could say, hey, those are the three decks that the Book of Genesis says that Noah's Ark had. But at any rate, when he measured those the floor to ceiling in between those thick layers the ERT scans were showing, when you add up those measurements, it equaled exactly the height given in the Bible. And so you have this, even the geophysical evidence without doing excavation of the measurements for the height, matching the biblical account. So that's point number 3. So number 4, I would say the next thing would be the patterns of metal that Ron and David Fasold and Dr. John Baumgartner found when they used metal detectors on the site. And I think this was done in multiple times, but the first time was 84 or 1985. And these were traditional beachcomb metal detectors that treasure hunters use, except they had like the highest, the priced ones, the high-end models that can go pretty deep. And so they were able to map out a pattern only in the boat formation, not out there in the mud flow around it. And so that suggests that Noah's Ark had metal fittings or metal brackets or nails or something metal used, and not just the gopher wood. And so again, you would have to ask yourself, if this was a natural object, why is there a pattern of metal just inside of this boat formation? And then my last point, and I'll make this quick, is the geophysical scans. So these are the new ones that were done in 2014 that I mentioned by John Larson, and then again in 2019. We had the Science Channel out here, and they filmed a team from America doing GPR. GPR is ground penetrating radar. And so they were these two types of geophysical survey devices, which can map out and peer below the ground. They showed angular structures, parallel lines, different layers inside the boat, suggesting that this is not just a random pile of rock and debris and mud, but actually a man-made object.
And that's called GPR?
Yeah, GPR, ground penetrating radar. And so you can think of it like sonar for a submarine, or like radar used in the sky for like airports or the military. So this instead, it's they point it the other way. They point it into the ground. It's like a simple way to say it, but this bounce off electromagnetic signals. They shoot thousands of them a second into the ground, and then the software in the computer can map out the different densities of what's below the ground, and so then that can show a shape or a feature or a layer. It could be a rock. It could be a house, or something, or a wall, something that's buried.
Okay, well, those pretty good, pretty strong points of evidence. So let me make sure I have them all. I'm going to review them with you here. So we have it. The shape is in the correct region. If we look at the biblical text, it is to the same length of the Egyptian cubit, the 515 feet, as in the biblical record. There were the scans that show the different deck layers, potentially the 3 different decks of the ship that were done. There's the signs of metal on the formation. Correct. And then there's the GPR, which shows the shape continues under the ground. I hope you enjoyed the first part of this 2-part interview with Andrew Jones of Discovered Media. Please look in the show description for links to several incredible videos related to the boat-shaped formation, along with links to several websites related to the findings. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a 5-star review along with any favorable comments you have. As the show grows, so too does our financial needs. please consider helping today by clicking on the Acast supporter link or by becoming an official patron of the show. Check out our Facebook page to leave comments or questions, or on Twitter at Casey Knowlton. You can also email me at thislatehourpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening in today. Stay on the alert, dear Christian. Until next time, God bless. You have been listening to This Late Hour. Your contribution helps pay our fees, improve our equipment, and build better content. It is my hope that your continued support of our show may bring future interviews and exclusives. Our goal is to always be improving our show so that the church may be strengthened in our mission to bring salt and light to this present darkness. May God richly bless you.